"What's a guy like you doing in a place like this?" the line supervisor asked, half joking as he handed over a pair of safety goggles. Yale Trenton gave a crooked grin and adjusted his cap. "Just trying to make rent like everyone else." The supervisor chuckled and moved on. Yale slid into position at the end of the machine line, heart hammering behind his company-issued uniform. He wasn't here for rent. He owned the place 10 manufacturing sites across the state, all under his name. But lately, something in the reports hadn't been sitting right. Numbers were fine. Profits looked steady. But the employee turnover at this specific location, Plant 7, was double the others. He didn't trust the filtered updates he got from district leadership. So, with a new beard, glasses, and 10 pounds trimmed off, he disguised himself as a transfer temp from another site. Since he hadn't met most of his line workers personally, no one here recognized him. The plant was huge, loud, hot, and fast-paced. Machines hissed and clanked nonstop. Yale had built the business from scratch 20 years ago, starting in a garage with one old press. Now he was here again, back on the floor, blending in with the people who kept his company running. "Name's Daryl," the guy next to him said, passing over a stack of stamped panels. He was mid-40s, solid build, sweat dripping down his brow. "You worked machines before?" "Some," Yale said, catching the panels. "Not like this, though." Daryl smirked. "You'll learn. Or you'll quit." Yale chuckled, but Daryl wasn't joking. Every part of the line was timed to the second. Miss a beat, and the whole rhythm collapsed. Yale fumbled early on, dropped a part, reset the press too slow, but Daryl covered for him without complaint. Some of the younger workers shot annoyed glances. One of the line leads, a tall woman with a clipboard, rolled her eyes and muttered, "Another useless temp." Yale caught it but said nothing. Break came 2 hours in. Yale and Daryl sat on crates near the loading dock, sipping from warm water bottles. "You've been here long?" Yale asked. 12 years, Daryl said. "This place used to be something, man. Now it's just different." "How so?" Daryl shrugged. "We used to get quarterly bonuses, safety awards, even cookouts. Now it's all budget cuts and supply chain issues. Last winter, we hit record output. They promised a bonus. Never came." Yale felt his stomach flip. "What happened?" he asked. Daryl rubbed his hands together. "Manager said it got lost in paperwork. District guy backed him up. Said they'd look into it." He scoffed. "Still waiting." Yale stared at him. "Wait. They told you the bonus was lost in paperwork?" "Yeah," Daryl said, laughing bitterly. "Right." Yale's chest tightened. He nodded slowly. "That's messed up." Before Daryl could respond, the line's supervisor barked, "Break's over." Back on the floor, Yale kept his head down, but his thoughts were racing. He made mental notes of names, behaviors, who helped and who didn't. The woman with the clipboard, her name tag read Casey, was clearly in charge of a line. She barked orders, but never lifted a finger. When a conveyor jammed, she pointed, then walked away. By the end of the shift, Yale's arms ached. His shirt was soaked through, but he'd seen enough to know Daryl wasn't exaggerating. There was a culture problem here. People looked tired, not just physically, spiritually, like they were just trying to survive the day and get home. After clocking out, Yale followed the others out the side door. In the parking lot, he caught up with a younger guy, maybe 23, who'd helped him clear a jammed chute earlier. "Hey man," Yale said. "Thanks for covering for me." The kid shrugged. "No big deal. You do the same." "What's your name?" "Jesse." "Jesse, you always this helpful?" Jesse laughed. "Guess so. My dad says work's work. You either show up or you don't." Yale smiled. "Smart dad." Jesse hesitated. "You know, you actually ask questions. Most temps don't talk." Yale chuckled. "Guess I'm just curious." Jesse nodded, then added, "Hey, if you're back tomorrow, stay away from Casey. She's not a fan of questions." Yale watched him walk toward a beat-up sedan with 2 car seats in the back. Back in his rental car, he sat in silence for a while. The words echoed in his head. Lost in paperwork. He'd built this company from nothing. He knew what that bonus meant to workers like Daryl. And someone in his company had just swept it under the rug. Not anymore. The next morning, Yale pulled into the far lot behind the plant, same as everyone else. No reserved spaces, no special treatment. A few workers were already trudging toward the entrance, coffee in hand, heads down. Yale fell in step behind them and kept quiet. Inside, the air was hotter than yesterday. One of the floor fans near the back of the line was missing. A handwritten, out-of-order sign dangled from its cord.
No explanation. No replacement.
He clocked in under his assigned alias and headed straight to his station. Daryl gave a quick nod, eyes already on the incoming stack of steel panels. "Hope you got some sleep," Daryl muttered, setting the pace. "Some," Yale said, pulling on his gloves. "Fans out."
Yeah.
"Broke last week. Maintenance says they're waiting on approval to order a new one." "Approval from who?" Daryl didn't look up. "Casey." Yale kept his face neutral, but didn't answer. The line buzzed to life. The first hour passed in a blur of movement and sweat. The broken fan made a difference. By mid-morning, 2 workers near the back of the press line were wiping their faces constantly, shirts already damp. One of them, a woman with thick braids tucked under a cap, looked like she was struggling to keep her balance. Casey passed by once, tapping a tablet, barking quick instructions, then disappearing into the office hallway. When the woman stumbled again, Yale stepped off his station and walked over. "You all right?" The woman nodded quickly.
I've fine.
"Just dizzy. Been like this all week. It's too hot back here." "You told anyone?" She glanced toward the front office. "What's the point?" Yale turned to Daryl. "She needs a break." Daryl slowed the line slightly, enough to create a gap. "Take 10, he told her quietly. "Go sit by the cooler." She gave a grateful nod and stepped away, legs shaky. A younger line lead short, wiry, maybe early 30s stormed over from the next section. "Why is she off the line?" Daryl kept his eyes on the press. "She's lightheaded. Heat's too much." The lead, his badge read, Travis, folded his arms. "Unless she's passed out, we don't stop rotation." "She needs a break," Yale said calmly. Travis turned. "And you are?" "New guy." "Well, new guy, you're not in charge of medical calls." Yale didn't respond. Instead, he looked at the cooler station. The woman was sitting on a crate, sipping water, face pale. "I'll take her position for now," Yale said, already moving. Travis didn't argue, but his glare lingered. By lunch, the tension was crackling. Travis hovered near the line, correcting motions loudly, criticizing rhythm, even when things were running smoothly. It wasn't coaching, it was posturing. He called out a mistake Jesse made on the feeder belt in front of the entire shift, even though the jam had been caused by a faulty sensor. Yale leaned over during a quieter moment. "He always like this?" Jesse gave a short nod, face tight. "Worse when Casey's around. He's trying to move up." "By what humiliating people?" Jesse didn't answer. His jaw was clenched. After the break, Jesse didn't return. His station stayed empty. Yale caught Daryl's eye. "Where's Jesse?" "Office." Casey called him in. Said he was disrupting line metrics. Yale's pulse ticked up. That doesn't make sense. He hasn't missed a beat all day. "Doesn't matter," Daryl said. "They don't like being corrected." The line ran short-staffed for over an hour. No one came to cover Jesse's position. Daryl picked up the slack, fast hands moving double time, sweat pouring off him. Yale shifted between his own tasks and Jesse's, trying to keep pace without causing another jam. Casey emerged briefly, crossed her arms, and stood watching from a distance.
She didn't speak.
Just observed, then turned and walked away again. By the end of the shift, Daryl's hands were trembling. Yale offered to help wipe down the press, but Daryl waved him off. "You're gonna get yourself noticed," he said quietly. "Maybe that's the point." Daryl looked at him, brow furrowed. "You don't talk like a temp." Yale held his gaze for a second. "I'm just tired of pretending bad management is normal." Daryl didn't respond. He just nodded once and walked off. Yale didn't leave. He waited until the floor cleared, then circled around the back hallway toward the office wing. The door to the shift supervisor's office was ajar. Inside, he could hear voices, Casey's and Travis's. Casey sounded annoyed. "It's always the same ones. Jesse questions everything. Daryl moves like he's owed something. And that new guy? Already getting in the way." Travis laughed. "You want me to write them up?" "Not yet. But if Jesse complains again, cut him loose. We've got 3 more temps coming next week." Yale's hand clenched around the notebook in his pocket. He turned and walked away before they spotted him. He drove to a nearby diner, sat in the last booth, and pulled out his phone. Not to call anyone, just to think. The waitress brought him water. He stared at the condensation running down the glass. The bonuses weren't just delayed. They were being buried. The fan wasn't just broken. It was being ignored. And workers weren't just undervalued, they were being actively pushed out for speaking up. He thought about Jesse's empty station, about the woman nearly fainting, about the way Casey had looked at her own employees like they were disposable parts. This wasn't bad communication. This was rot. Yale had built this company on the belief that no one should feel afraid to speak up. He remembered the early days, how grateful he'd been for the guy who taught him how to run the press without mocking him. How he'd once driven 3 hours to deliver a bonus check in person when payroll screwed up.
Now,
someone like Jesse was being punished for doing the right thing. And the worst part, he'd never have known if he hadn't come here himself. The next morning, he didn't clock in. He stood outside the plant entrance in a clean slate gray suit, tie slightly loose, sleeves rolled to the forearm. The district manager had been called. HR was arriving within the hour. And Casey? She had no idea her whole world was about to change. Yale watched the workers arrive. Daryl approached slowly, eyes narrowing as he took in Yale's appearance. "You're not a temp," he said. Yale nodded once. "No." Daryl crossed his arms. "Then who are you?" Yale looked him in the eye. "The owner." Yale stood still as the morning shift filtered in, each person glancing at his unfamiliar face and sharp attire. Some gave polite nods, others looked away, but no one stopped. Until Casey came out. She walked fast, her steps sharp, her expression unreadable as she approached. Her eyes dropped to the ID badge clipped to Yale's belt, the real one, not the fake temp tag, and her jaw locked. "You're not with corporate," she said, voice low. "No," Yale replied. "I built this company." She blinked, just once, but otherwise held her composure. "If this is about the temp program, we've had some challenges. I'm not here about temps." Behind her, Travis stepped out from the office hallway, catching the tail end of Yale's words. He stopped mid-stride, reading the tension. A few workers slowed down as they passed, sensing something was off. Daryl lingered near the door, not entering, just watching. Yale turned his eyes back to Casey. "Where's Jesse?" She hesitated. He stepped closer. "You pulled him off the line yesterday. I want to speak with him." "He left early. Said he wasn't feeling well." That a common way to handle performance feedback here? Make people feel unwell? Casey looked to Travis, who stayed silent. Yale didn't give her time to respond. "Text him.
Now.
Tell him to come in.
Payday.
I'll speak to him myself." Casey's fingers hovered over her phone, but didn't move. Yale's voice dropped. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." She stepped away, typing quickly. Travis started to speak, but Yale cut him off.
"You Follow me. Now.
Travis blinked. Sir, we're doing a walk. I want to see how you lead without giving orders. They walked through the plant side by side. Machines roared, conveyors clattered, welders sparked. Yale didn't speak until they reached the back section where the broken fan sat unplugged, the same paper sign fluttering lazily in warm air. Still not replaced? He asked. No, Travis said. We've been waiting on budget sign-off. Budget for a floor fan. Maintenance has procedures. I don't control the purchasing. Yale crouched near the station. The woman who had nearly collapsed yesterday wasn't here. Another worker had taken her place, already tugging at her collar. You remember her? Yale said, standing. Which one? The woman who asked for a break. You told me it wasn't your call unless she passed out. Travis's eyes darted. It's a high-output line. If we stop for every complaint, Yale cut in. She wasn't complaining. She was overheating. He stepped forward, his voice steady. Do you have first aid certification? No. Have you ever been trained to assess heat fatigue? No. Are you allowed to override safety protocols? Travis said nothing. You gave her a choice between pushing through or being labeled a disruption. That's not pressure. That's coercion. Travis looked around, then back at Yale. I was following the handbook. Yale turned to one of the workers nearby. You ever get a safety refresher here? The man shook his head. Not since I started. 3 years ago. Yale nodded once, then looked at Travis. Go upstairs.
Clean out your desk.
HR will meet you in 20 minutes. Travis started to protest. Wait, I'm not asking. Yale turned back toward the line before Travis could finish. As he walked, someone touched his arm. It was Daryl. He spoke quietly. She's watching you. From the mezzanine. Yale glanced up. Casey stood behind the glass of the break room, arms folded, lips tight. She know about Travis? Daryl asked. She's the one who protected him. Daryl exhaled through his nose. Then she's not the only one who needs to go. Yale's phone buzzed. A message from the HR lead. In position. Ready when you are. He nodded to Daryl. Clock in. Keep the line steady. I'll be back. Upstairs, Casey was waiting. I assume you're making a statement, she said. I'm making a correction. You're aware Travis was one of our most consistent shift leads? His line never missed a quota. Yale stepped into the room and shut the door behind him. If quotas come at the cost of safety, we're doing it wrong. He pushed people hard. That's true. But this is manufacturing. It's not a charity. Yale's eyes narrowed. You ever run a press? She scoffed. I manage the metrics. I don't need to run a press to understand throughput. I disagree. She stepped closer. Look, I know what this is. You drop in, make examples out of a few people, and leave again. But I've been holding this place together while the rest of the region slips. We've hit every target. We're under budget. At what cost? I've kept the doors open. No, Yale said quietly. They stayed open because people like Daryl kept showing up when no one else cared. Not because of you.
She didn't respond.
Her jaw twitched. Yale opened the break room door. The HR lead was waiting just outside. She's done here, Yale said. HR nodded. We'll handle next steps. Casey's expression didn't change, but she didn't argue. She picked up her things slowly, deliberately, and walked past Yale without another word. Downstairs, word spread fast. People didn't cheer. They didn't clap. But the shift in the air was immediate. Like a weight had lifted. Jesse arrived an hour later, looking cautious, hands shoved deep into his hoodie pockets. Yale met him near the loading bay and led him into the now empty office. I owe you an apology, Yale said. Jesse raised an eyebrow. For what? For letting systems grow that punish integrity. Jesse sat, still guarded. I just told the truth. They made it feel like that was a problem. It never should have been. Yale handed him a printed document. It was a formal reinstatement, with a full day's pay and a bonus attached. "I'm not asking you to come back," Yale said. "But I'd like you to." Jesse looked it over. "What about Daryl?" "He's been covering for people all week. He's getting a promotion." Jesse blinked. "Wait. Really?" "Effective immediately." Jesse leaned back. "So, this wasn't just a PR stunt?" "No," he nodded slowly. "Then yeah, I'll stay." That night, Yale didn't go home. He stayed late, walking the floor again, this time with a clipboard and two supervisors from other plants. They took real-time notes, measured airflow, checked emergency kits, logged repair requests that had been ignored. By midnight, a work order for 5 new floor fans was filed and approved. The next morning, a fresh safety orientation rolled out. It was brief, clear, and required. Nobody was exempt. Daryl stood next to Yale when the first session ended, clipboard in hand. "Feels different already," he said. "It's going to stay that way," Yale replied. And for the first time in a long time, Daryl believed it. Yale stepped into the break room just after the second shift clocked in. The lights buzzed overhead, and the coffee pot was already half empty. A few workers glanced his way, unsure whether to nod or avoid eye contact altogether. He didn't force either. He simply grabbed a black binder from the table, tucked it under his arm, and walked back out toward the line. The floor was quieter than usual. Not in volume, the machines still ran loud and constant, but in tone. There was no shouting. No heavy footsteps pacing behind stations. No one looking over their shoulder. People moved with a kind of quiet alertness, like they were waiting to see if the changes would stick. Daryl stood near the center of the line, clipboard in hand, eyes tracking the rhythm of the press cycle. He wore a navy blue supervisor's vest now, not because of ceremony, but because it was practical. He didn't stop Yale as he approached, but he did speak without turning. "They're watching you," he said. "I know. You going to speak to them? Or let them keep guessing?" Yale looked down the line. Jesse was back at his usual post, hands steady, eyes focused. The woman who had been pulled off the line from heat exhaustion the day before was now working in the assembly area, where airflow was better and the pace more forgiving. 2 new workers shadowed her, clearly in training. "What would you say if you were me?" Yale asked. Daryl finally looked over. "Say what you saw. And say what you're going to do next. They've heard enough promises." Yale nodded once. Then he walked to the platform near the floor supervisor station. It wasn't tall, just a few steps up, but it was enough to be seen. He raised a hand and waited. One by one, heads turned. Machines weren't stopped, production had to continue, but eyes lifted. Hands paused where they could. Daryl gave a sharp whistle, and the noise dipped just enough for Yale to speak without shouting. "I came here because I stopped trusting the reports I was getting," he said. "I didn't announce myself because I didn't want to be treated differently. I wanted to see the truth. And I did." No one moved. "I saw people doing 3 jobs without complaint. I saw safety issues ignored. I saw decent workers punished for speaking up. And I saw a culture that treated loyalty like it was disposable." He paused, scanning the faces in front of him. Most were still, a few arms crossed, a few brows furrowed.
No chairs. No nods.
Just quiet listening. "That ends now." He held up the binder in his hand. "This is a full audit. Every repair request, every overtime slip, every bonus that was skipped or lost over the past 18 months is being reviewed. Not by managers. By me." A flicker of movement. Someone near the back adjusted their goggles, eyes locked on him. "I'm not going to fix this overnight. You've been overworked for too long. But I will be honest about what we can do, and I will not let anyone hide behind numbers again."
He stepped down.
No applause followed, but no one turned away either. And that, he knew, was more honest than any speech could earn. By noon, The plant's HR lead had set up a temporary office in what used to be the old supply room. It was now a rotating feedback station, anonymous if needed, face-to-face if preferred. Workers scheduled in 5-minute slots during staggered breaks. No one was forced. But the sheet filled quickly. Yale stayed out of the room, but he read every note submitted. Some were straightforward requests for better tools, clearer safety procedures. Others were harder. One worker described being passed over for training 3 times, despite having more experience than the person chosen. Another reported being threatened with fewer hours after asking why their pay stub looked short. Each statement was documented, signed, and forwarded for formal review. Hiring still lagged, and shift coverage was tight. Yale didn't make false promises. Instead, he authorized a temporary reduction in daily output targets by 10%. Not forever, just until they could get caught up on training and safely distribute the workload. No one complained. They adjusted. Maintenance repaired the broken fan in the back section, but Yale approved the purchase of 6 more. They arrived the next morning. Daryl personally helped install 2 of them before the shift began. In the afternoon, Yale walked the floor with a different kind of clipboard, one blank, no forms, just space to write. He stopped by each station, asked 3 questions. What's the hardest part of your day? What would make it easier? What's something we've never asked you, but should have? Some answers were simple. New gloves. Shift rotations every 3 hours instead of 4. One worker asked for earplugs that didn't fall out every time he bent down. Others ran deeper. You want to know the hardest part? Said a woman near the stamping press. It's knowing if I get injured, they'll replace me before I get a call back. Yale didn't argue. He wrote that down, circled it. The next morning, the company's regional safety officer arrived on site. Not for a tour, for a full recertification. Every line was reviewed. Emergency protocols were tested. First aid kits were restocked. And for the first time in over a year, someone checked the fire exit in the back corner that had been blocked by packing crates. It was cleared. Immediately. By the end of the week, 4 more employees had been promoted into lead roles, none of them from the original management circle. One stepped into the quality control position previously managed by an outside contractor. Another took over scheduling, after showing she'd been doing most of the floor logistics already on her own. Casey's absence was never discussed, but her name disappeared from the door. Her former office was converted into a rotating training room for new hires and cross-department workshops. The walls were painted over. Jesse stopped by Yale's office, now a small corner desk in the administrative wing, no nameplate holding a folder. Got a few suggestions, he said. I don't want to step on toes, but we've been talking on breaks. Figured it was worth sharing. Yale took the folder. Send me more when you've got them. Jesse tilted his head. You sure? I thought I was pushing too hard before. You were, Yale said. Which means you were exactly who we needed. They didn't have enough people yet. The hiring process took weeks. But the workload was more balanced now. Bonuses were recalculated and issued retroactively, based on the hours and output data from the past year. Every worker received an itemized breakdown with their check. No surprises. No missing lines. On Friday afternoon, Yale stepped outside the back door of the plant, where the last of the week's shipping crates were being loaded. The air was cooler, the sun low. He leaned against the railing and watched the crew finish up. Daryl walked over, wiping his hands with a rag. You staying here long? He asked. Yale shook his head.
No.
Already making plans to visit Plant 4 next. Another mystery to solve? More like making sure I never have to go undercover again. Daryl gave a short laugh, then turned serious. You didn't have to do all this. Yale looked at him. I did. I just didn't realize how far things had gone until I saw it with my own eyes. They stood in silence for a few seconds. Then Daryl said, If you ever want to know how things are going, don't wait for reports. Just ask the guy who's been running the same station for 10 years. Yale nodded. I will. He watched as the last crate was sealed, and the crew clocked out, drifting toward the lot in twos and threes.
No fanfare. No ceremony.
Just the quiet end of a long week. But this time, they didn't walk like they were bracing for more. They walked like they expected better. Because now, better wasn't a promise. It was already happening.